From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Chung, and this matters. The Delta variant of COVID isn't just near, it's here. Public health experts in Ontario say the more transmissible Delta variant will replace the Alpha, or B.1.17 variant, as the dominant strain in the province. It already makes up nearly 50% of all cases here, according to the Ontario Science Advisory Table. The variant is circulating in the US too, and right across the Atlantic, a look, of sorts, into the future, as Delta is delaying the UK's reopening plans, as cases have surged in the last 3 weeks.
I think it is sensible to wait just a little longer.
The equation is straightforward. 2 doses of the vaccine are effective against the variant. The variant is spreading quickly, so it's a race. Can they vaccinate people faster than the variant infects? Joining us on the podcast are my 2 Toronto Star colleagues, health reporter Jenny Yang and investigative reporter Kenyon Wallace. Jenny and Kenyon are reporting on the Delta variant and taking a close look at how they're circulating in England. Can the UK be the crystal ball for Canada? And what should we be learning, preparing for right now to keep the Delta variant down? Jenny, Kenyon, thanks so much for being here to talk.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
By now, most of us have heard and read about the Delta variant. We know that it's more transmissible than the original strain of COVID. So help us set the record straight here. Jenny, I'll turn to you first. Baseline, what should we know about the Delta variant?
So the Delta variant, as far as we know, seems to have emerged from India, which, as everybody knows, experienced a devastating surge in COVID-19 cases just a couple of months ago. And this variant, I think what I've seen is that it likely emerged from the Delhi area and it started showing up in the UK. And it's since driven a new surge in cases in the United Kingdom, despite the fact that the UK is one of the world leaders in terms of vaccinating their population. So it's been very worrying for people around the world to see the emergence of this variant. And the early data we've seen coming out of the UK, which is the source of our best data so far on the Delta variant, is that it's somewhere in the ballpark of 40 to 60% more transmissible than the last scary variant we were all worried about, which was B.1.1.7, now known as Alpha, which first emerged in the UK and drove Ontario's third wave. And that variant, if you guys remember when we were first talking about Alpha or B.1.1.7, it was about 50% more transmissible than what we like to call now COVID classic strain. So Delta, in a nutshell, is just way more transmissible, and that's why it's causing a lot of concern.
Do we know if the symptoms are any different than the other strains? Is it basically what we've been seeing from COVID, but just more transmissible, or is there something different about it?
So early days, we're still, I think, learning a lot and still need to learn a lot about Delta. But there's been some early data on hospitalizations, which showed that there does appear to be an increased risk of hospitalization. But that we still need to give more time to see how things shake out. And elsewhere in the UK, there's a study underway that allows people to self-report their symptoms through an app. And what scientists are seeing through this study is that younger people getting infected by Delta appear to be reporting more cold-like symptoms. So you've got your runny nose, sore throat, headache type of thing. And fewer people are reporting the loss of taste and smell, for instance, which used to be one of the hallmark symptoms of classic COVID. And, that's kind of interesting. It's still early data, but it suggests that maybe it'll be a little harder to detect when people are getting infected with Delta, and that maybe there are some shifting symptoms happening.
And Kenyon, what about the Delta variant here in Ontario? It's not just obviously in the UK anymore, it's here. So what do we know about Delta in Ontario and how it's starting to move in this province?
Yeah, so about a month and a half ago, we saw the number of positive COVID tests coming back, testing positive for the B.1.1.7 variant, which is also known as Alpha, drop. And the question was, okay, well, if B117 variants are dropping, which was the dominant variant that drove most of the third wave, what is taking its place? And scientists and epidemiologists looking at the data surmise that it was at the time the Delta variant. And so moving on to sort of present day, what they sort of thought of in terms of the Delta variant's behavior has proved true. I think right now, the percentage of positive COVID tests with the Delta variant in them is around 40% in Ontario, and it's expected to keep growing. And that's simply because it's much more transmissible than the Alpha variant, so it's easier to catch. And I think because of its ability to spread. The data is early, but what we know so far about it is that what the data suggests is that you can still catch it even if you have 2 vaccines. So it's easier to catch, it spreads easier. And simply because of that, it's going to become, at least according to most of the experts that we've spoken to, the dominant variant in Ontario quite soon. As to when, again, it's still early days, but the trajectory suggests that it's going to become the dominant variant here in Ontario.
Yeah, the infectious disease experts we've spoken to, certainly in your reporting with Jenny, including Dr. Peter Uni of the Ontario Science Advisory Table, he's framed this as being a race, almost, between the variants and the pace of our vaccine rollout. Jenny, can you explain where that thinking comes from and explain how that actually works out?
Yeah. So in the last wave that, started in the winter, there was some talk of heading that wave off with vaccination. But the experts we spoke to back then were all clear that the third wave Ontario experience was never going to be stopped with vaccinations. There just wasn't enough time for that. This time around, though, totally different picture. There is a feeling that it is very much a race between the vaccines and the variants, and that we do have a chance to head off a fourth wave by accelerating our vaccine rollout. And even though, the early data shows that there is some decreased vaccine efficacy against the Delta variant, a single dose is actually still pretty great at preventing hospitalization, which is such a critical difference because so much of our policymaking around COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, has been aimed at trying to save hospitals from being swamped and overwhelmed. So if we can even just roll out a first dose to enough people to sort of ease off the pressure on hospitals, that'll be a huge difference in a fourth wave, if indeed we experience one going forward. So, I think the thinking right now is that we just need to go slowly, tread carefully, because what we want is to buy enough time for a critical mass of people to be vaccinated with their first dose and hopefully their second dose in time for when Delta really starts to gain a toehold here, or to really prevent it from gaining that toehold. So, every 3 weeks, another 2 million plus Ontarians are getting jabbed with vaccine. So every week that passes is really valuable time that we can, sort of armor ourselves better against the onslaught of this nasty new variant.
Mm-hmm. And the data out of the UK, again, it's still fairly new, but that double dosing has proven very effective still against hospitalizations and serious illness, even when it comes to the Delta variant, right?
That's right. And actually, I was just looking at Public Health England data, and it looks like roughly 7 to 8% of Delta infections that have involved hospitalizations have been in people who are fully vaccinated. So, you can still get infected, of course, after your 2 doses of vaccine, but that's a pretty, a small percentage. And I think for a lot of experts watching that data, that's very reassuring to see.
We'll be right back. There's been so much of this pandemic that's been hard to see even what 2 weeks, a few months ahead looks like. But I have really liked this analogy of the UK being called a crystal ball in terms of the direction of the Delta variant, that it's almost like seeing 4 weeks into the future because it is the dominant strain in the UK. So what does the situation tell us what it's like across the Atlantic?
Yeah, sure. I think for the majority of the pandemic, we've seen that what often happens in Europe, notably England, happens for some reason 6 to 8 weeks before it happens here. But With the Delta variant, I think this is based on the interviews we did with some experts, but their prognosis is that we might see something different play out in Canada this time around for a couple of key reasons. One is we in Canada have really promoted the use of mRNA vaccinations, which are proving to be more effective against the Delta variant than AstraZeneca. Whereas in Britain, a huge portion of their population was vaccinated with AstraZeneca. So overall, they may be slightly more susceptible to contracting the virus. And that is not the case here in Canada. So that might stand us in good stead as the Delta variant begins to grow. So again, that doesn't mean you're not going to catch the virus. But if you do, the efficacy of the mRNA vaccinations here tells us, at least the early data tells us, that you are unlikely to get seriously ill and even more unlikely to be hospitalized. The other thing about the UK that is slightly different is they have not really fully shut down their economy completely. So, Jenny, am I correct in saying that they're still in school?
Yeah, so, Dr. Peter Juni pointed out that the relaxing of measures in the UK were much broader and, their rules were a lot looser when they started lifting restrictions around the time Delta was making inroads. So where we are right now with Delta's emergence in Ontario, our restrictions are much tighter than what they were in the UK when they were kind of at this stage in their sort of Delta trajectory, their Delta story. So I think people like Dr. Peter Juni agree that looking to the UK can tell us something about what the future might look like in Ontario. But they sort of point to the UK as more of the cautionary tale of what could happen in Ontario if we make similar mistakes to what UK policymakers did. And if we don't learn the lessons that we learned here in Ontario back in February, when we lifted restrictions too early as a new variant of concern was gaining a toehold at that time, which was Alpha. So a crystal ball, but also kind of a cautionary tale.
So maybe perhaps not a one-for-one kind of comparison, but especially here in Canada, as you mentioned, we have different allotments of vaccines. We have a lot more vaccine. We have a lot more mRNA vaccine, and also reopening plans are different. So a cautionary tale, but not necessarily like a direct comparison always.
Right. And the key message is our fate isn't written just because this happened in the UK. We still have time to change the trajectory of our Delta story. And one more thing I'll add is that in Canada, we've started vaccinating 12 to 17-year-olds. And the uptake has been actually really high in places like Toronto, which has been a Delta hotspot. So that could also be a key difference. And our schools, of course, have remained closed. So I think that also may give us a bit of a leg up compared to the UK.
When we say we still have time to make sure we don't end up like the UK, one of the issues that was raised by the experts we spoke to was what's going to happen at the end of the summer if we have not decided to vaccinate children under the age of 12 at that point. And the question was, okay, if we do open schools, and ventilation is still a problem in many schools where we haven't retrofitted, what is that going to mean for kids who are now going to be in classrooms together, who may be unvaccinated for the Delta variant? And what we do know is that right now there's no evidence that children are particularly more susceptible to the Delta variant, nor that they get sicker if they get it. But the question is, again, if you have a group of people who are unvaccinated and you put them all in a room with poor ventilation, what's going to happen? And that is something in Ontario's trajectory. That's sort of like a question mark that has yet to be answered. And hopefully we won't have to find ourselves, dealing with problems when school starts in a few months. But that was a red flag that was raised by a couple of the people we talked to.
So coupled with that and the timing of everything, the Delta variant could very well be almost a bit of a sleeping giant in this province. Is that fair to say that if we don't deal with this in the right way, that if we don't learn from some of the other lessons, there is a potential of a fourth wave here? That's not out of the question.
There's definitely potential for a fourth wave. And, at least one expert I spoke to said he believes we'll see it in some form, but it just, very likely won't be anywhere close to as severe as the last one. And certainly the impact on hospitalizations should be much lesser. But what we'll probably see happening is that cases will become even more concentrated in the most vulnerable communities that have always seen higher COVID-19 infection rates and which are now seeing lower vaccination rates because of barriers in those communities to getting vaccinated. So letting the fourth wave wash over Ontario is really, putting more marginalized communities at even greater risk and allowing those communities to suffer the brunt of yet another wave. So, that's why people who might feel like, well, many people are vaccinated now, a fourth wave is manageable, it won't be so severe, the hospitals won't be overwhelmed to the same extent. I think a point that's really missing in that viewpoint is that it really will be communities and individuals who've already been in harm's way and placed at greatest risk of infecting COVID that will yet again bear the brunt of yet another wave. So, the thing I think we should all feel by now with COVID-19 is that we have to remain humble in the face of this ever-evolving pathogen and viral threat, and that it always finds a way to sneak in wherever we let our guards down. And we now know so much about how to keep it under control and where our weak points are. And so I think the feeling really is we've come this far, we're so close to the finish line, that to allow in like a fairly devastating fourth wave, one that is more serious than it needed to have been, would just be such a tragedy at this point in the pandemic.
Yeah, there has been so much that we have learned in how the virus moves through, especially, vulnerable populations that don't have as much vaccinations. This is where it starts to creep in. And we have seen that again and again through even the last 6-8 months, right?
And we haven't really done anything to meaningfully improve protections for a lot of these vulnerable populations and essential workers crammed into warehouses and factories. Have we improved, ventilation in those workplaces? Have we really brought up vaccination coverage in those working populations? No and no. So we're really not in any better position to protect these communities in the face of a fourth wave. So, to just sit back and be complacent about letting a fourth wave take root would just really kind of be unconscionable.
Jenny, Kenyon, thank you so much for helping explain this and sort of giving us maybe a preview of what we can be learning over the next little bit and the crucial weeks that are ahead.
Thanks so much, Adrian.
Thank you.
And that is Toronto Star reporters Jenny Yang and Kenyon Wallace. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Chung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Muthar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.